that go? There we go. We're in Philippians chapter 2. I do have more handouts in case anybody wants one, doesn't have one. It's for continuing to serve, chapter 2, verses 12 through 30. Okay. I have extras. Extra? Are you going to share? You're fighting. Okay. All right. One or two? All right. Okay. Philippians chapter 2 starts out with a discussion of how to live in a, as he's going to say in our reading today, a crooked and depraved generation. Yet today you'd look around, listen to the news just one evening, and you've had enough of crooked and depraved, haven't you? Things aren't getting any better, are they? There have been some time periods in history where things have improved and people start to behave, but eventually it fades off. And that's just typical human nature. In a fallen world where Satan seems to be in charge, and I say that very carefully because he's not. But he likes you to know or think that he is. It's just like our view of hell. Satan is not in charge of hell. He's the chief prisoner. And our descriptions of heaven and hell, it's good to go back and review them because we tend to get all a little off track. You ever hear Paul Harvey on the news when he reads things that children say? There was one episode where he was reading what children would say in Bible class and stuff. And they were talking about Noah's Ark, and the teacher was going to describe an animal that was on the ark with Noah and see if they could guess what it was. Well, he's short, lives in trees, a big furry tail, and he collects nuts. And the kids were quiet for a long time. She couldn't figure out what was going on. And then one kid just raised his hand and said, "I know the answer is Jesus, but it sounds like a squirrel to me." You know how kids do that. And one of the episodes then had, what do you think of heaven and hell? Well, the answer was, hell is a place where it's hot all the time, like Florida. I had friends in college that, we tease them, they're from Florida, and said, "Oh my, is that what Florida's like?" One said, "I don't want to go to heaven, I want to be with all my friends." Now, of course, they're thinking after death, and they just want to. But there have been country music songs, basically. If they're in Mogan David in heaven, which is a whiskey, who the H wants to go? Yeah, I want to be with all my. They think it's going to be a big party, and yet all of the imagery is supposed to give you the impression that it's dark and cold, lonely. And yet there's fire, and the majority are going there. See, because we think of heaven and hell as a place. Really, hell is the absence of God. People live their life and want God to leave them alone. He's a gentleman, and eventually it's okay, fine. He leaves them alone. God is not there. He is not punishing the people there. The punishment is basically self-inflicted because you can't change it after that. Remember Jesus' parable of the rich man and Lazarus? Once the judgment was made and the separation was done, it's over. And he wanted people then, he's still barking out orders. Send Lazarus to my brothers so they don't go here. No, they have the scriptures. No, but if someone goes in person and tells it, no. If they're not listening to this, nothing a human is going to tell them is going to change their mind. And that is the world we live in. People get used to a view, a thought, a concept, And it is pulling teeth to try to change their mind. In fact, a lot of them will say, if you can show me that in the scriptures, I will change. That is proof positive you are not going to change their mind. Because it just isn't going to happen. But that's the world we live in, and nothing is different. Even from the first century, it's all the same.
I heard a fellow say one time I worked with, said that hell couldn't hold him and heaven didn't want him.
Well, he's going to find out. Even heaven, it's not necessarily a place. It's our relationship with God is where we can have full intimacy with God. When in all of history did God have such a close relationship with humans that there was nothing between them? And the scriptures actually in the creation account say that they were naked and not ashamed. When was that?
Garden of Eden.
So actually heaven is the restoration of paradise, where we have a one-on-one relationship with God. When it was discovered that sin was in the world, God had come down to take his daily walk with them in the garden. And where were they?
Hiding.
Hiding? What were you hiding for? Did he really need to know? Yeah. He's trying to get them to fess up, isn't he? He's trying to blurt it out, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't come clean. I was naked and ashamed, so I hid myself. Who told you were naked? Did you eat from the tree I told you not to? Woman, you gave me. And everything has just been downhill from there, hasn't it? Even at a time when we think we're having a reformation, a revival, how long does it last?
Short time.
Not long at all. Even in my own life, when I'm feeling good, finally God, shows me he has been working in my life and things have worked out. It's okay. Your answer to my prayer was a lot better than the one I was expecting. I'll go with that. But eventually it doesn't take long before I'm there again asking and needing more help. It doesn't take long. Therefore, life is a continuous revival. And it has to be. Because Satan knows eventually we're going to get tired. Eventually, we're going to give up. I think I've told you before, my days working with FedEx. It wasn't the big dog. The big dogs would scare you and make you want to change your clothes. But it was the little dogs that would bite you. But they wouldn't do it while you were standing there. You'd turn and walk away. We'd wear high-top boots because that's where they would nip, right on your heel when you turn around to leave. That's how Satan is. He knows he can't stand against you. Even in the Garden of Eden, all he could do was suggest. And how long it took, we don't know. But eventually, he wore them down. And they gave in. And that's how he works. He knows he has to learn it through experience with you, but he will learn what you will give up that relationship with God for. And he will not stop until he gets it.
What people used to do in secret, they do boldly. They do boldly. I mean, sin.
Yeah.
I heard something yesterday, I can just tell you real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a guy's voice. He wants to be transgendered into a woman.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to find a woman who wants to be transgender into a man. He wants to get her uterus and her ovaries implanted in him. And he says he wants to become pregnant. He wants to be the first transgender so he can do an abortion.
Okay.
It's his voice. It was his voice. It wasn't somebody quoting it. And I got wrecked the car when I heard that. And I mean, how bold, how sin is.
Yeah.
To be able to.
Let me read you a description of the first century. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth with their wickedness.
Yeah.
Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. God hasn't hidden anything from us. But that's the first sin was thinking they needed to know more information. And God was withholding it from them. And we hate that, don't we? We hate when we find out things have been going on that we didn't know about and no one told us. That's how Satan won with Adam and Eve. And he's still working at it today, isn't he? Yeah. All right. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So now we're getting to a point where there's a philosophy where we weren't created, we evolved from lower life forms. You know, they're getting away from that now. Science will not necessarily teach that anymore. They will say it because that's the common thought, but have you figured out where they're now saying we eventually came from?
Apes.
No, that's evolution. But they realized this world hadn't been around long enough for all the changes that needed to be made.
The big boom.
Yeah, the big boom was part of the evolution. You've probably not been close enough in educational circles to realize where they're doing. Why are they looking for water on Mars?
Trying to colonize it.
So the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Incas came from another planet.
Oh, I saw that on TV, that happened. Aliens came down. Right?
That was gospel on TV.
All right. So the first thing Satan can do is get us away from being created by God because we're created equal. Now. And if you get God out of the equation, then you can't make it a moral agenda. Now it can become political. See how Satan works? And eventually we feed off of it because we're bombarded with it everywhere. Okay, and that goes for everything. It says here, although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but in their thinking they became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images to make look like mortal man and birds and animals and reptiles. And you can read on there. That's Romans chapter 1. That's how Paul starts his systematic theology. Theology is a study of God and how he works. In the creation, systematic means from the very basic kernel, to the full-grown plant in Christianity. What God was doing all those centuries, training people for Jesus. And here we are. And people are stuck back here with the kernels. They can't seem to move forward because someone is in their path, in their ear, in front of their face, and they just get tired of fighting him. In Hebrews, you see, although now you need to be teachers, you need to start drinking milk all over again. You need to go back to the basics. Here in Philippians chapter 2, Paul is saying God came here as one of us. A hymn in verses 6 through 11, early Christian hymn, talking about the deity of Jesus. He was God in the flesh, and yet as a human, he became a servant. As a servant, he became a slave. As a slave, he gave himself up to death, an immortal being experiencing death, even death on a cross. Only today can we think that the cross of Christ is a glorification. We wear crosses on our necklaces and on our bracelets, earrings. I see guys that wear earrings, cross earrings, cussing and swearing and playing it up all times. Just like one video I saw a while back where these two girls were on a high school playground beating the tar out of each other. And one of them, when she was captured, was pulled aside like this, and her bracelet said WWJD. What would Jesus do? Okay, nothing really has changed, has it? Satan is good at what he does, and he's incessant. Book of Revelation says he knows his time is short. And so he is after as many of us as he can get, because he can't defeat God. He's already defeated. This is what he doesn't want you to know and realize. He's already done for. You stand against him, James says, he flees. All you have to do is stand there. But he doesn't want you to know that. And so what happens, just like with Peter, he was walking on water, wasn't he? He walked all the way out to Jesus. They shook hands, they hugged, they walked back to the boat together, right? How did Satan defeat that one?
He quit looking at Christ.
He took his eyes off Jesus, didn't he? He did know who to call out to. So give him credit for that. Lord, save me! And Jesus grabbed him. Oh, and I love this video interpretation I saw of this once. Finally, it's not a Jesus who denounces people and looks harshly at them and tells them, what? Why did you doubt? That's how most of them do it. He grabbed him up. No! Why did you doubt? You were doing it. I like that view of Jesus, because that's the one that seems real to me. So Paul here is saying, okay, Jesus came down here, did all of this for us. It's all done. All we have to do is just abide in him and hang on to the end. And we've got to keep going. Can we ever take a break? That's when the little dog nips you on the heel. That's when Satan scarfs you down. That's what Peter says. He's a roaring lion. How much prey should a roaring lion catch? You see, I see pictures of Africa and stuff like that, and Rustin can tell you more about that. When the townspeople hear the lions roar, they go inside. And yet Satan eats us every time. That's why, to me, in the book of Revelation, it's a very unfortunate translation into English when they depict Satan as the beast. Because what do you think of when you think of a beast?
Something ravaging.
Big hairy monster, right?
Yes.
It's exactly what Satan wants you to think. He comes to you looking like your best friend. Like someone, like the government. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Nobody believes that.
That is Satan. We think about the Antichrist, and he's an end times thing. John says, nah, Antichrist is here now, when he was writing this. And there's lots of them. Not just one. Any one person or group of people who set themselves up against the cause of Christ are anti-Christ. And that you can see every day. And be careful. As Paul says in these next verses, 12 through 18. 12 through 30, actually. I think that's the second page. No? Be careful that you don't end up in certain situations being anti-Christ, because you can get to that point. So, therefore, in verse 12 of Philippians chapter 2, since God came here as one of us, paid the price for us, rose from the dead as a foretaste of what we have coming to us. Here's the first fruits. You remember the first fruits in the Old Testament? When the farmer's field would produce a crop, they'd take a tenth of it and give it to the priests, basically, for their sustenance. That was their pay for their job, because they didn't get land. They got cities and villages because they were ministers for God. That was called the first fruits. The first fruits were a forecast of the harvest to come. If the first fruits were the healthiest, then you were going to have a healthy crop. Jesus' resurrection from the dead, Paul calls that the first fruits for those of us who are in him. We get the same that he does. But we have to hang in there. We have to be strong. We have to keep going. He came, he did all of this for us, so let our mind be the same as his, who in very likeness of us was actually God in the flesh. God became one of us, and this is how he acted. Do we have any right then to seize power? To hold over somebody else? Make our opinion everybody else's? Therefore, my dear friends, as you've always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Working for Christ, then, as the outline says. Whose responsibility is it? It's the elder's job, right? It's the preacher. But Jesus said, wait a second. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. What do you mean I have work to do? Because rest to me means taking it easy, right? Couldn't you just see the disciples then when Jesus was telling that for the first time? And then he says, take my yoke upon you. Hang on. What's a yoke for? It's for work, isn't it? You just said you're going to give me rest. Now, the idea in Scripture of rest is the stress-less life where you're good with whatever happens. Because, like with Jacob, he wrestled with God, didn't he? That's why he got the name Israel. We are the new Israel, Paul describes it. Not that we wrestle with God, even though we do because of our sin, but now we wrestle with God. He's now our partner. He's going to help us with what we need to do. Now we are the new Israel. Only instead of against God, as an opponent, like he was with Jacob, he could have torn Jacob limb from limb, couldn't he? But he didn't. He waited for Jacob to pull a sly act. Jacob limped back to the rest of the people there, though. He had a constant reminder there. He could have been torn limb from limb. And he was never the same after that, even though he still struggled with sin and with Satan. Now we have God as our ally, as our partner. We wrestle through life with God. He helps us and moves us along. All right. Therefore, we have to continue to work. Why do we have to continue working? I give about 6 reasons. You can probably think of some others. Here's one. God requires us to work just like he put Adam in the garden and gave him a job to do. Work came before sin. So work is not a punishment for sin. And I appreciate Lloyd Kane, who was the director of the summer camp that I would go to as a recruiter for the college, trying to recruit the kids to go to Michigan Christian College at the time. He told us as counselors, when the kids act up, not if, when the kids act up, do not give them work as the punishment. Because it's common thought, they don't want to have to wash the dishes. They don't want to have to clean out the slop bucket of leftover food. Now, don't give them work, because work should not be a punishment. It was actually, with Adam, it was a blessing. It gave him something to do. Work is ownership. When you work at something, it's yours. That's what's wrong with a lot of the work ethic today. they're just there to get a paycheck. They don't really care about the product. But when we're involved in it, we own it. It's us. Like for me now, I'm sending these parts through. I checked it out, and I said it's okay. My employee number is right there. I don't want them to find a flaw afterwards. Okay? I own it now. That's what God does. He puts us to work so that we own it. It's also for participation. We work together with Him. There's some joy involved in participating and being included. One night, there wasn't much production to be done, so they invited me to order food delivered in. I had already brought my lunch, and I didn't have any cash in my pocket. So I said, thank you, I appreciate the invitation. God invites us to work with Him. That feels good, that He respects me enough and wants me to be involved. It also provides what I call continuance, because not only are we involved in the work, but we start after a while to see where the flaws are, and so we want to help improve those things to improve the quality of the product. And God allows us to work with Him so that we can help improve things. Also, it makes it personal. Again, like I said, it's got my name on it. I want to make sure it's quality. It also, well, what do you think? Why does God have us do the work?
Idleness brings on problems.
Idle hands are a devil's workshop. That's a good saying. It's not from Scripture, but it's a good saying. Yeah, what happens when people are just sitting around watching and looking? I know people, and they would never admit this, and I'd never really say it to their face, but I know people who come to church who think their job is to listen and make sure everything is said and done exactly right. And when it isn't, it's their job to point it out, or they may go to hell. Is that the job of what we do when we're here? No. And when I didn't say things the way people were always taught they were supposed to be said, they'd go to the elders and say, now, he's your employee. There's a problem. And if someone heard that wrong, they're going to get a wrong impression. You need to tell. And the elders where I was were very good about saying, he's right over there. I'll go with you. Let's talk to him about it. They wouldn't do it. Because their job was to point out faults and complain. There's another reason then why God has us involved. Is because when we're not, we get the wrong impression of what our job really is. So that's another reason I had down there. I have an example down here, and you can write it down if you want to. Take a look at it this past week. When Samuel was sent to Jesse's house to anoint one of the sons of Jesse to be the next king. You remember when the oldest son come before him? Oh yeah, this guy, he's the one. And God says, no. I've already considered him, and he's not up to the task. And it wasn't because God rejected him. He told Samuel, you're looking at it through human eyes. God does not look at the outward appearance. God's looking at the heart. And his isn't matching up. And he didn't say it doesn't right now. He's not the one. And so the second oldest come before him. And Samuel then, okay, this is the guy then. God said, no. How many sons did he go through? 6. There were 7 boys. So 1 through 6. Okay, hey, now, go to Jesse's house, Bethlehem. Anoint one of his sons. But it's not 1, it's not 2, it's not 3, it's not 4 or 5, 6. You got another boy? Well, yeah, he's the runt and he's out with the sheep. Now, see, Jesse was not a wealthy shepherd, sheep owner. If he had hundreds of sheep, he would have hired someone to take care of them. As it was, the boys had to take their turn. And you can see the character of the older boys when David brings supplies to them. And in my mind, I'm visualizing the story going on. Hurry, take the supplies. Get him out of here. And on the way home before that giant comes out here. Right? Oh, no. And Goliath is there. And David says, who's this? And he's looking at all the king's soldiers hiding behind the rocks and trees. It's just one of them. He's defied the living God. Now you see the older sons, and how did they react to that? Go home. You just came here to watch a show. But they were there to watch the prophet of God anoint him, the runt. But why was David then successful against Goliath? You know he had the advantage, and he wasn't a little boy. Saul, who stood head and shoulders above everybody else, offered him his armor. And I wonder if that would have been a very stupid move for a commander of an army to give this one little runt something to do. I think he was going to set up a diversion, go around the other side, maybe escape, get out of there while they could. I don't know. Saul was that way. David was tall enough for Saul to at least offer him his armor. But David had a very big advantage, and it wasn't necessarily that God was on his side. What did David do in preparation?
Got a couple stones.
What did he have with him?
Stone and sling.
Okay, have you ever seen videos on YouTube of shepherd boys in third world countries slinging stones?
They become very talented.
They can hit a tree at 30 yards dead center and sink the stone in the trunk. David had his equivalent in his day of a gun, and he shot Goliath right between the eyes with it. Why did he pick up the other stones? You'll see something in there about during the time of the judges where the same family Goliath came from. Yeah, the Nephilim, the giants. And there are 4 names. Okay. Goliath had 4 brothers, possibly. He wasn't thinking, if I miss, I have another stone. He's thinking, if those brothers come to defend their brother, I'm going to mow them down too. How did David learn that, though? How did the young guy build such strong faith? He learned by caring for sheep out in the wilderness. Because if you've got 20, 25 sheep out in the wilderness, who's around to help you? Wolf and the lion came, the bear came. He learned to take care of sheep. He learned to protect them. And because of that, he learned to love them. In the Psalms, when he talks about the good shepherd, the Lord's my shepherd, there's nothing I lack. He leads me beside quiet waters. He leads me to pastures. He does all this. Okay, God is my shepherd. How did he learn that? But through experience. That's how we learn it as well. We learn it by going through it. He watched how God took care of him, protected him while he protected these sheep. And when he stood in front of that giant, it's just one guy. Boom. That was it. He learned it through participation. That's how we learn it. Unfortunately, today, Satan has been very good in church settings where we let the religious leaders do everything for us. We even let them tell us what to believe. And we believe it because that's what we've always been taught. We've never questioned. And that's how Satan wins.
They don't search the scripture.
They don't work it out themselves. And so Paul says, continue to work out your salvation. The word for fear, I hate that translation all throughout Scripture, whenever that word is used, Hebrew or Greek. It does not mean to be scared. God does not scare us into submission. And that is the interpretation of most people with the book of Revelation. They're terrified. I remember going into a deli shop one day where I was preaching Southern Ohio, and there was one of the, what's that newspaper that has all these strange things going on? What was that called?
The Inquirer.
There you go, National Enquirer. Yeah, the trumpets for the apocalypse were going to start being sounded within a week or so. And I looked at that, and I wasn't thinking. I should not have said it. It's one of those things that got out, and I wished I could get back. They said, oh, thank goodness. We only have a week more before we go to heaven. And the lady behind the deli was offended because that terrified her. I said, no, when the trumpets sound, Jesus is here. It took all of my encouragement and everything to get her to see this, and she did not see it. She was terrified. She said, I'd take those out back and burn them if my boss would let me. But that's how people view the book of Revelation. When actually the word for apocalypse doesn't mean to destroy and to frighten and scare and wipe out. That's usually how we see God, though, isn't it? God is here to restore things, to bring it back to order. We're the ones in our chaos listening to Satan that ruin everything. Now, apocalypsis. Apo means to pull, something is moving away. And calypsis is the cover. So when you got the Tupperware in the refrigerator that's been there for a few months, what is that? You take the cover off, and that's what apocalypse means. Take it, oh, yeah. We usually put it back, don't we? Instead. But that's what Jesus was doing for John and for us, first century and into the present time. He's just letting us know it's all done. We win. Nothing to be afraid of. But Satan has done such a good job to scare us, isn't he? This word for fear does not mean scare. As Paul says to Timothy, we were not given a spirit of fear to fall back into slavery, but a spirit of power and of love and of self-control. This word is that of respect. We respect God so much for what he has done for us. We're not going to do anything to tarnish his name or his how people view him. Because other people are going to get their view of God and Jesus by watching us. So that's the respect. We're going to work out our salvation trying to be like him and not mess it up for him. And the trembling does not mean shaking in fear. That word for trembling is with vigilance, watching out, because Satan is lurking and hiding behind every corner. And he's waiting to pounce. So work out your salvation with respect and vigilance. I wish our English versions would say that. It would give us a lot better impression of what we're doing, doesn't it? And that's why we meet together as often as we can, so that we can still be encouraged to keep the respect and to keep vigilance. Keep watching. All right. But who's really at work within us? Notice, he says here in verse 13, it is God who works in you to will to want to do it, and to act, to actually put it into practice according to his good purpose. God created you to be like him. That's not sacrilegious. We were created in Christ to be like him. And when we're trying to be like him, we are respecting his person, his image, his cause, his purpose, and our lives will show it by how we think, by how we speak, and how we act. But we can't give up, or Satan will eat us, because he is lurking. So therefore, do it out of respect, and do it with vigilance. Keep going. Paul will say in the Corinthian correspondence, he will use present tense verbs for those who are being saved and for those who are perishing. Because life is the judgment. Here is where we are learning. Here is where we are being picked up, put back on our feet, try again. And God is patient and loving and kind, and he's willing to work with us, even though how many times do we mess up? You see Jesus with the disciples, there was one incident where they couldn't cast a demon out of a young kid. So the father brought him to Jesus. I asked your disciples if they couldn't do it. Remember Jesus' reaction to that? Oh, how long am I going to be with you guys? Bring him to me. And then afterwards, like I would be at work, if they caught a mistake that I'd messed up, why couldn't we cast him out? So this kind only comes out with prayer. Which tells you, it should tell you in that, there's a clue. They were trying to do it on their own, weren't they? Only with prayer. Your connection with God all things are possible. So, that's how we have to work it out. God is working in us. God is doing it. He's giving us the will to do it because we respect him. We want to do what he created us to do and to be. We're doing it with vigilance because we know an enemy is lurking and we can't fight him without God's help. So together, we are in that yoke together with Jesus, and we will get through it, but we have to keep moving. We can't get to a point where we're not moving. If we stagnate, Paul talks about us, our lives, our outward appearance, he says, English softens the blow. Our outward appearance is wasting away, is what our English translation says. The actual Greek, Paul says, our outward appearance, our bodies, are rotting. They're putrefying. But inwardly we're being renewed day by day. So we worship God in spirit because that's where the energy comes from. That's where the help comes from. That's where our goal comes from. That's God's will within us. Outwardly, we do our best. Admit it. I look in the mirror every day and it's not really getting any better. I can fluff it up and I can do what I can to make it presentable, but I have to admit it's not doing very good. But it's God then keeps moving us along. If we ever stop, we start to putrefy, we're free game for Satan. And that's why we have to keep going. All right. I know we didn't get finished there, but we'll continue on. There is, if you will, for next week, I want to bring up a passage Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, an incident with Moses where he veiled his face. And I think it has reference back to that concept there, where the shining, glowing face of Moses. Take a look at that this week, and we'll pick up from there then next week.